Welcome to the afternoon session on global disorder, polyworld, or multi-alignment. I have a great pleasure to have you here today and to be among great experts this afternoon. So let me start first of all with His Excellency Mr. Diebe, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark. Welcome. And His Excellency Mr. Pinkus, Ambassador and Director of Global Affairs Directorate from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania. Welcome. Mr. Stuart Thompson from the Central Committee of the United Kingdom. And we do have Mr. Strajna Subotic, Program Manager and Senior Researcher from Serbia. Welcome, Strajna. And Mr. Fabian Zulek, Chief Executive and Chief Economist from European Policy Center from Brussels. And we do have General Dominique Trinquant. Welcome and congratulations for your new book. Thank you very much. Since it is such a topic with, very general and so much aspects to cover too, so I have asked to our distinguished guests to, focus in some specific regions, of course. We do have some very challenging questions to ask, and of course, the answers cannot be given in 1 hour, but we will try to respond to most of them. So let me just mention, first of all, that what we have been talking about, the global balance, otherwise called, were defined by the American dominance and the total Western hegemony. So the architect of a desire for universal alignment on common values and policies, this power pole often delineated and executed the rules of the global diplomatic game. Now in decline, sometimes disjointed, this power pole looks with fear towards the east, where a dynamic, ambitious and counterpower is emerging. In this context, where the cards are being reshuffled due to a fragmentation of the sources of power balance, upheaval in the world order is observed. So, of course, all of these are very challenging and very thought-provoking questions and affirmations. So I would turn, first of all, to His Excellency, Mr. Diebe, with a first question on this, what we call otherwise the polyworld vision. What are the new power centers across the world? Thank you.
Well, thank you again so much for having me here in this panel as well. I look forward to a very interesting discussion. Listen, I think just to set out the landscape, I think what we are, you rightly alluded to, we are moving from a unipolar world, Pax Americana, where US and its allies were kind of in the center of gravity. And there, there are different scenarios where we are moving. I mean, some believe that we are moving into a new kind of Cold War between US and China, and it will be the new poles of the world. Others, maybe we will watch a more fragmented, multipolar world with several gravity centers around the world. And finally, there's also a fourth option. If you look at it, it could be that, China will be the center, like a Sino-centric world. Already today, more than 120 countries around the world has China as the first trade partner, for example. So there are different options. I think discussing this topic, I think it's interesting to see how we perceive things. In the Western world, or where I'm from, much of the population believe that we are moving into a more like a new Cold War. While if you look at the so-called Global South, they are looking very differently at this. They maybe look at more at this, as from a multipolar world or a fragmented world with several centers. Africa, of course, India, Latin America. So it's not only US, China, Europe, but a lot of other regions. And what I think we need to do to come together is to understand the perspective of each other. And I think it's very important that we, coming from the old global north, understand what are the concerns of the so-called global south. When I was foreign minister, for example, we worked very hard with India. India is definitely the most, well, it's the most populous country in the world today. It's surpassed China now. It has a very good prospect for growth. So India did the first green strategic partnership with any country in the world. They did it with Denmark because we believe in Denmark that India will be an important partner. The same with Africa. Many African countries will be in a few years will be very important partners to all of us. And if you take up the mid of the century, there will be 2.5 billion people living in Africa. For Europe, it will be the main partner, I believe. So we should deepen our relations much more. And if you look into that world, I think it will be much more a multipolar world in the sense that there will be several centers of gravity. What is challenging in this discussion to me is how do we ensure that we have common values, common rules, common norms in that type of world. I very much believe in multilateralism. I believe in the UN Charter. I believe in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and all of these values that are enshrined there. But I also watch the world and I see that there is a decline of democracy. There's a rise of authoritarian rule and ideas. What do we do about this? How do we come together? And secondly, I think we also need to address the problems, not only Russia and aggression against Ukraine, but also the consequences of wars, whether it's in Europe or in the Middle East, because they are hurting disproportionately many countries in Africa and other places. And if we don't understand their concern and address them, then we will fail. For example, climate change. We have COP coming up. I mean, we promised to deliver resources to deal with the climate crisis, also for developing countries. We failed to deliver it. So the trust is low. So I think, my part of the world, Europe needs to step up, US needs to step up, and we also need to understand the perspective of other parts of the world. I think that's a preconditioning for getting together and resolving some of these problems. And I believe we will move into a more fragmented, multipolar world, as I said. But our populations they think differently. So let's see what happens. But I think we should come together also understanding each other better. I think that's the first condition for real new global action.
Thank you very much. Indeed, there are so many puzzles while we are talking about this another global order. So, indeed, it is important to be indeed reflective in, for example, how to restore the global order. So this is where I would address my second question to His Excellency Mr. Pincus on the fact that, yes, there is global order to be addressed. And so how to do this when confrontations between emerging and post-industrial powers seem to intensify. So, and here, for example, I can mention India, or other powers which are not necessarily aligning with the Western powers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Once again, thank you for that ability to be here and to speak to you. I would start that with saying that I am absolutely agree to what was said by Minister. It's not a surprise. We are really very like-minded countries coming from the same region with same vision, and that point that we should understand each other, that we should look not only at our positions, but at the positions of different countries, different interests is a key. That doesn't mean that we should lost our identity. Our values are very important. We stick to those values, and we are going to protect those values. And maybe, well, for some representatives of West, it looks that, well, everybody should live according to our understanding, but probably we should look at other other places, and also consider that world is more complex than it is. So I would say really first instrument is a dialogue, and it must be a dialogue, or not different monologues when you speak each other, telling your truth and not taking very much attention what is said to you. The question itself to restore the order. It's well, I would doubt that it would be possible to restore the order. And when we mentioned those times a little bit ago, I would say it was not the most important issue that the Western world was leading at that moment. It was much more important that international organizations had their role. They were efficient and they were respected, and they were safeguarding order in the world. And well, we can speak about, and it was touched in many previous panels, the UN, particularly Security Council, but not only that global organization. If we look at our regional organizations, let's say in the process of protecting peace in Europe, OSCE played a big role in the 90s and beginning of the century. Now this organization is not functioning anymore because, well, some members of that organization started to behave differently. And then we have also situations when dialogue is not possible because there are partners which are not willing to have that dialogue, or they would like just to dictate their position. We should find the way how to scope with that. Speaking about different poles in the world is very dynamic. Really, just less than a decade ago, we were speaking mainly only about Western world and China. Now we have India, and definitely Africa should have a bigger attention and to be able to implement its potential, in the world policy as well. How to do this, it's to be seen, but we should be flexible probably in our ideas and possible solutions. One more topic I would like to touch is to find a sustainable solution in a future. We should be proactive, not reactive. Because right now we are flooded by news, phones are beeping all around the clock, news coming, and many politicians and diplomats and governments, they're reacting to the news, to what's happening. It should be found the way how we should be prepared to focus more on planning, on providing ideas and taking leadership in that. That could be a way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I will ask to General Trinquant. It is important on the other side, to mention a little bit about your most recent publication and what would be your point of view on this global order and what can be the potential international cooperation among the emerging powers. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je peux parler en français, il y a la traduction, oui? Ouais. Ok, donc je vais parler dans la deuxième langue officielle de l'ONU, le français, pour vous dire d'abord que je suis fasciné sur le fait que nous ayons un panel européen. Alors, qu'il soit d'anciens de l'Union européenne ou de futurs de l'Union européenne, nous sommes tous des Européens. Et je crois que ceci a quelque chose à dire sur l'ordre mondial. l'Europe qui était au XIXe siècle, au début du XXe, jusqu'à la Première Guerre mondiale, un peu le leader qui a organisé, qu'il soit allemand, britannique ou français, ont connu des guerres absolument dramatiques. La dernière après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, qui a amené à une construction globale qui s'appelle l'ONU, a amené ensuite à une construction qui s'appelle l'Union européenne. Et le miracle de cette chose-là, c'est que tous ces Européens qui se sont battus pendant des siècles n'imaginent même plus qu'ils peuvent prendre les armes les uns contre les autres. Et je pense qu'il faudrait regarder ce miracle et en tirer peut-être des solutions, mais au moins des pistes de réflexion. Et moi, ce que je voudrais tirer comme piste de réflexion, la première, pourquoi ce monde qui existait depuis 1945, je parle maintenant du monde global, est en train de s'écrouler? D'abord parce qu'il était organisé autour du vainqueur essentiel. L'Union soviétique avait été aussi vainqueur, mais essentiellement les États-Unis de la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Et ce vainqueur, et je dis toujours à mes amis américains, parce que ce sont mes amis et que j'ai vécu là-bas et que je les connais et que je les apprécie, qu'ils ont perdu l'exemplarité qu'ils devraient avoir si on est leader du monde. Cette exemplarité, ils l'ont perdue entre 2001 et 2003, au moment où ils ont décidé de balayer la charte de l'ONU, de faire la guerre sans l'accord du Conseil de sécurité. Et dans le monde, 20 ans après, puisque c'était il y a exactement 20 ans, ceci a laissé des traces indélébiles. Tout le monde dans le monde, aujourd'hui, dit « deux poids, deux mesures ». Parce que je le dis, et Dieu sait si ce qu'a fait le président Poutine le 24 février est totalement répréhensible, mais mettons les Américains et les Russes dos à dos sur l'application de la charte de l'ONU. Les Russes ont bafoué le Conseil de sécurité, ont fait la guerre. Les États-Unis ont bafoué le Conseil de sécurité, ont fait la guerre en 2003. Et donc, il y a un premier point qui est l'exemplarité. Ça veut dire qu'il faut reconstruire quelque chose. Et pour reconstruire quelque chose, c'est très compliqué. Et moi, je pense qu'on est à la fin de l'illusion que nous avions de l'extension de la démocratie dans le monde au besoin par les armes. Je cite l'Afghanistan et l'Irak par exemple. C'est la fin de cette illusion. Et aujourd'hui, j'entends beaucoup parler de nos valeurs, eh bien, il faut les renforcer, être exemplaires. Et là, j'en reviens à mon introduction sur l'Europe. L'Europe, aujourd'hui, est un aimant pour les autres pays européens. L'Ukraine, la Géorgie, la Serbie, vous êtes tous sur le panneau, ils ne rêvent qu'une chose, c'est de rentrer dans l'Europe. Et c'est ce mouvement-là qu'il faut provoquer dans le monde. Montrer que nos valeurs sont des valeurs qui peuvent être non seulement partagées, mais qui peuvent être attirantes. Et il faut arrêter de donner des leçons de démocratie. Je dis, quelle démocratie? Américaine, allemande, française, britannique, il n'y en a pas une qui est pareille. Pas une qui est pareille. Puisqu'on en parlait dans un panel où j'étais avant, pareil, démocratie israélienne, avec la proportionnelle qui amène le gouvernement qu'on voit actuellement, qui est celui qui a conduit à la guerre dans laquelle nous sommes aujourd'hui. Donc je crois vraiment que la première chose, c'est qu'il faut que les régions arrivent à s'organiser avec leurs valeurs, avec leur façon de voir la démocratie ou pas, et qu'à partir de ce moment-là, ces différentes régions, globalement, puissent reprendre le grand projet auquel je crois, qui est le projet des Nations Unies, où 193 pays sont capables de se réunir et discuter ensemble. Ça donne l'Assemblée générale, mais ne sont pas capables de décider, c'est le Conseil de sécurité. Et donc, là, il y a vraiment quelque chose à voir. Le problème, pour moi, n'est pas le multilatéralisme, c'est au moment où il faut prendre une décision. Tout le monde veut bien discuter avec tout le monde, mais quand il faut prendre une décision, là, les problèmes sont beaucoup plus importants. Voilà.
Indeed, it is true that, yes, the roundtables have never been the challenge in itself. It has been mostly the decision-making process, which is the hot issue. So it is important to not simply have the international dialogue, which is, of course, the means which would bring us to a common agreement. And indeed, we are talking so much about globalization, the global order, and at the same time, it seems that the definition of nation is, slowly disappearing from one side. And yes, we do have from the other side a vague of nationalism. So with this definition in mind, I would ask my next question to Mr. Subotic concerning the role of the nations today, since we do have these ups and downs of this phenomenon from one side disappearing and reappearing with especially the right-wing movements. Thank you.
Thank you. To answer your question, in just a couple of sentences of the background that will lead me to the answer. First of all, this is my second panel for today. And just to bring you briefly what we discussed during the first one is a similar topic, geopolitics. And my colleague heard this, but when non-European colleagues discuss geopolitics, EU was simply not part of the equation. It was never really mentioned. They talked about rising powers such as India, Brazil. They talk about new poles such as China. They talk about standard poles such as Russia and the US, but the EU was simply not part of the equation. And I'll say something controversial, might seem controversial. The EU, I believe, will not be able to act as a global power as long as it doesn't demonstrate the ability to integrate the countries within its own courtyard. Here I'm referring to the countries that could benefit from its enlargement policy. I mean here the old candidate countries such as Serbia and other countries of the Western Balkan region. And on the other hand, now we see Ukraine. Why we ended up here? Well, I believe that the EU, fortunately, has lacked a strong vision. On the one hand, the Balkans, having all the problems from the legacies of the 90s, we're always told, well, you guys become democracies and our doors will be open to you. We now see that if you wait for the Balkans to democratize themselves, they will simply not be able to do it on their own. Considering that we're so much integrated with the EU's economy, but also political system, we do unfortunately require assistance, both economic and political. It's as if when a teacher is supposed to make sure the pupil is able to finish the grade. But it's not just because it's in the pupil's interest to finish the school, it's also in the school's interest, in the neighborhood's interest, in the mayor's interest, in the country's interest to have the people within this same courtyard on the same level of, let's say, educational levels of standards. So here, in that sense, this is part of the why the EU's vision hasn't been successful. Secondly, Ukraine, although it fulfilled the criteria, it was a European country. You need to be a European country first and foremost to be eligible for to get a European perspective. Regardless, Ukraine couldn't even get the European perspective, yet alone candidate status or the accession talks in the past. So knowing that this vision was lacking, and here I'm coming to your question, we have seen on the one hand the EU imagining it can solve world problems, Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, maybe China, sustaining China, containing it, dealing with Turkey and so on and so forth, yet it has kept sending a message that it can't handle Montenegro, a country of 500,000 people. The transformative effect was missing, and as a colleague said, l'Union européenne a perdu l'exemplarité. In that sense, it has stopped being as attractive as before. So now we see that things are changing with the start of the war in Ukraine. Ukraine got not only the European perspective, but a candidate status, and I hope they will open now accession talks. But the Western Balkans are also now being part of the EU's equation, because the EU realizes it's in its own geostrategic influence, interest, to showcase that it can sort out the things in its own courtyard, and only then it can project and try to act as a stronger global power. Considering this lack of action in the past from the EU, I recently decided to introduce a concept which I have named a limbo state. And this is a concept that could be applied to my countries, but you guys can think whether you could see your countries also fitting with this concept. A limbo state, I would define, is a state whose leadership is unable or perhaps unwilling to break free from the status quo. This becomes the leadership's key and defining feature, inability or unwillingness to break from the status quo. So in my case, so in the case of my country, Serbia, we see it simply being stuck. On the one hand, its official vision is EU membership, but if it knows that membership was not simply on the agenda, it simply got disincentivized from implementing the reforms, and therefore its vision has only been an ink on the paper, not the practical aim that it aimed to pursue. Secondly, in terms of levels of reforms, this was something that has negatively impacted its domestic political landscape with the rise of nationalism and right-wing parties having the fertile ground to grow their roots, because even if positive reforms were taken on our path to the EU, they were simply not unable to have this transformative effect, considering the overall environment was simply not suitable for breaking free from the status quo. And thirdly, besides the vision and reforms, we have entered into an arena of social apathy. If you ask people from Serbia, at least, they don't believe Serbia will ever join the EU. It's hard for people to say where they see their country moving in the next 5 to 10 years. And this is quite a problem. So when you have these elements together, then we've reached the final conclusion why Serbia acts the way it does in terms of its geopolitics, trying to balance between the East and the West. Considering that other countries which have made progress in the past, North Macedonia changing its name, or Kosovo and Montenegro solving some border issues, they were not rewarded. Simply Serbia, as a country who hasn't done its level of reforms or foreign policy alignment, was kept in the same line, was treated equally as other countries in the region who have demonstrated some of the abilities that were required on the path to the EU. So to conclude, the story is not simple. Our countries are unfortunately currently stuck in their forever accession process. And I hope that the EU becomes aware that the Balkans, and of course now the eastern part of Europe, can become a good testing ground for testing new ideas, new concepts, for overcoming the status quo and old concepts, so they can demonstrate that they are able to integrate their courtyard swiftly while ensuring the value-based principles are upheld, therefore sending a message that an enlarged union could become a stronger union in the future that could actively engage in resolving geostrategic issues. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Strajna. Thank you for reminding us that there is no such thing as a gap. There will always be a superpower filling this gap. So in case the EU will not be present, especially in such a fragile region such as the Balkans, with all its legacies of the past, of course, other powers will fill this void. So yes, it is important to ask the role of the EU. And when we talk about the EU, we cannot help but think of the only one country who decided to leave. And this is where my question goes to Mr. Thompson, since it is important to notice from one side the United Kingdom, after the Brexit, launched even more its foreign policy towards the Commonwealth. And of course, there were especially all the Brexiters, which pushed very much towards this direction, towards the fact that, yes, the United Kingdom has many options, so the EU is not the only option, which definitely it is true. So, Mr. Thompson, what do you have to say in this regard concerning the role of the UK in the global order, and, well, considering even the recent nomination of Mr. Cameron as the State Secretary? So this would tell us a lot, and his first visit in Ukraine. So, to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the UK is slightly sort of schizophrenic in the way that it's approaching its post-Brexit role. So for many of those, as you rightly point out, leaving the EU was about opening up trade deals, being more substantial on the world stage, a land of, or a world of opportunity and plenty. I'm not sure, and indeed very many conversations I've had, the last few days here, that is particularly happening. So if you talk to people from, the Commonwealth countries, the UK government will talk about, re-engaging in a way that arguably we didn't when we joined the EU in the sort of early 1970s, but they don't see lots of evidence of that. Equally, lots of the politicians and from the ruling party, from the Conservative Party, see that global role very much in economic terms. It was very much about trade deals. And all the time that we haven't really done that many trade deals, there's been a few, Canada and Australia and those, but they could be and have been criticised for their scope. On the other hand, Boris Johnson, when he was Prime Minister, there have been so many Prime Ministers, of course, I'll probably lose count in a moment as well, but anyway, in recent years. So, but he very much made, the Ukraine and support for the Ukraine very much absolutely at the centre of his Prime Ministership. Now, that's all very admirable, but frankly, shows a lack of, or to me, showed a lack of confidence in his own domestic agenda. It was easier to look outwards on that one issue rather than deal with the challenges at home. And indeed, how long did he last as Prime Minister? I don't know, year, 18 months or whatever it was. It wasn't even very long. On to the next Prime Minister lasts 5 weeks. On to the next Prime Minister, now the one that we've got currently. And the real challenge that Rishi Sunak faces, and I'll come on to the David Cameron appointment in a moment as well as part of this, is that whether we're talking about relationships with the EU, whether we're talking about relationship with China, whether we're talking about dealing with immigration, illegal immigration and legal immigration, nothing can be separated from the forthcoming general election. Everything is about maintaining unity within his own party and attempts to show that he is dealing with the challenges that British people arguably are most concerned about. And that's, so in that sense, it becomes very much inward looking rather than outward looking. So we don't have, particularly well-established norms or procedures to deal with, immigration issues. But frankly, the processing within the UK is appalling and there are huge backlogs and costing millions. Instead, it all becomes about actually, can we get rid of some of these people? And I use that terminology quite deliberately, to Rwanda. Can we stick them out? It's all through that domestic prism rather than, thinking about the country's international role. So what do? You sack the former Home Secretary, the former Foreign Secretary becomes the Home Secretary, and then you get David Cameron in as the new Foreign Secretary. So an international statesperson that's going to show how fantastic the UK is on that international stage. Now, the trouble is when you ask anybody what David Cameron's, most significant foreign policy achievements would be, there's a bit of a silence in the room because it's either Brexit, depends on your view of that, I get my terminology slightly wrong here, but being involved in Libya, which didn't work out particularly well either. So where is the background for this guy in terms of his international foreign policy experience? And I think it's pretty thin. And also, again, without wishing to labour the point, But Rishi Sunak, a couple of weeks before, made a big song and dance, made a big speech at the party conference about, being the candidate of change and wanting to move on from the 30 years of failure, the preceding 30 years of failure, and maybe that, you mentioned limbo state there. I was partly thinking maybe we're a limbo, maybe the UK is a limbo state, actually, sort of that stasis that you can end up in. Blames the last 30 years. So what do? Your next job, your next appointment is somebody that was Prime Minister for 6 of those 30 years. It makes no sense. So Cameron himself may have a better CV. It may erase some of his dodgy lobbying that allegedly he's been doing, since he, lost office. But I think all of this is symptomatic of a failure to appreciate, understand, carve out a place in a multilateral world, I think.
Well, yes, indeed, it is true that it's important to see, among other things, while we study the new global order, all the possible political appointments. Very often the political appointments would tell us everything, especially, for example, when we think of the High Representative of the Foreign Affairs of the EU and, the role that he has been playing. So it shows us how the heads of states of the EU want to still preserve their own decision-making power into the member states. So it means that from one side, yes, we would have all the supranational organizations, but yes, when it comes to appointments, then it tells us all. And yes, most of these appointments, of course, they occur in Brussels, in otherwise called the EU bubble, where the high officials would make the decisions, which then would have an effect on all the member states. So, of course, once we talk about preserving multilateralism, this is the question mostly that we would struggle with: how to preserve it when some countries are turning towards a policy of interest-based multi-alignment characterized by a form of à la carte alliance. And this question, of course, goes to Mr. Zulek, who, among other things, would have, to give his perspective from Brussels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for inviting me today. I'm an economist by training, so I'm going to do something rather unusual. I'm going to try to answer the question. I will stick to my true nature as an economist. It's not going to be very uplifting. So what I mean by that is, you asked, how do we preserve multilateralism? The answer is, it's too late. The multilateralism which we have known does not exist any longer. So we have to talk about how we create something different. And that is incredibly hard. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think that is so difficult. And that is very difficult for the European Union, because we have believed in the multilateral system for a very long time. It has benefited the European Union immensely. But it is also the founding principle of the European Union. So we have to rethink rather fundamentally. But that does not mean, and I have to make a little comment on Brexit, it does not mean that the answer is less cooperation, because that is exactly the wrong answer in the kind of challenging world we are living in. So we live in a world of fragmentation. We live in a world of polarization, of extremely high volatility, of great uncertainty. So it is no surprise that countries are reorienting themselves. But I would argue that the kind of narrow national interest-based alignment we are seeing now is going to fail. It's going to fail in one crucial issue, which is to preserve the common interest. When it comes to issues which we are all facing collectively, in particular climate change, but there are other issues as well. You have to have a functioning system. You have to be able to create commons. And that doesn't work if you are acting with my country first in mind, if you're acting with power politics, which drive every decision. But unfortunately, the two superpowers we still have are not interested in the current multilateral system anymore. Arguably, one of them has never really been that interested, China. But America also lost its interest, and we can see that when we look at the WTO. The continued impossibility to get it back up and running means that as a future tool, it doesn't function anymore. So we need a new governance focused on global commons, which is worked out between the middle powers, between the global community, involving the big countries, involving the superpowers, but not dominated by them. So a kind of common interest-based multi-alignment, or even a new form of multilateralism. But that's going to be really, really difficult. Because when we're talking about economics, when we're talking about technology, energy, climate change, then we're also talking about economic competition, we're talking about prosperity, we're talking about security and economic security, we're talking about the possibility of weaponizing interdependence, and we're talking about an intense redistribution of economic costs across the globe. And redistributing costs, as we know from within the European Union, is much, much more difficult politically than it is redistributing benefits you get from further integration. So we're facing a very, very difficult political economy. And one of the key things which I think I would challenge all countries to really think about is, if you want to create a common system, you have to make compromises. You have to be able to accept that that common system is not going to reflect everything you want, everything you have at home. And it means that you still have to accept that you're going to be bound by those rules, even if they are not what you want to do at that moment in time. That's what a rules-based system means. And we have a long experience now in the European Union how difficult that is. But the only way we can get there is to have more dialogue, to work on concrete cooperations, and to build trust, because in the end, you have to be working together on these issues. And that's a very long process, but we don't have a choice but to do it, because in the end, existential issues like climate change are going to very much affect all next generations, whatever nationality they have. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It is true that it was needed a dose of pessimistic, maybe, or realistic perspective from an economist point of view. So yes, why not? It is important to reflect a bit on this as well. And I would actually ask a question to all of you before opening the session to the questions to the public about the risks and opportunities. Since yes, I think that it is our task as well in this panel to ask and to give some recommendations on which may be the potential opportunities, especially for all these countries. So for all these countries, which actually they are trying to establish themselves as influential players in the stage. So, well, starting with you, Mr. Kobe, how do you see it? Or are there some opportunities that you would identify? And if yes, which would be the main key players?
Well, thank you. Well, I share the pessimistic view that I just heard on where we're going, but there are opportunities, and that's why, I mean, we talked in another session about reforming the UN system, because we need a system to deal with the common challenges that we have at hand. But I also think, you know, in all of our countries, sometimes we are willing to sacrifice something for values that we hold dear. You know, our democracy, when you're from Denmark. And I think what happened last year in Europe, for example, you know, with the Russian aggression against Ukraine, we were all reminded that, you know, freedom doesn't come without a cost. Yeah. And I hope that we will be able to create the same urgency around the climate issue, to be frank. You mentioned it as an existential issue for all of us. It is actually connecting us in many ways. We see extreme weather, we see destruction. And I hope that this can trick this corporation saying, okay, we need to, because we need to deliver a planet to the next generations that we can, you know, that we can think is okay. And therefore, we need to act now. We need to bear the cost. That value of, you know, ensuring the next generation, something like that, we need to create this urgency, in my opinion. But at the same time, I want us to say that we will go through a rocky period, because all of us, including Europe, Denmark, and all, we are now looking at our national security from an economic and military perspective. All of us, because energy. Access to energy, for example, is fundamental to any state. So we will see that we will strengthen our supply chains, or even home source a lot of what is now in a global system, enable us to be nationally secure. And I must say this, in my opinion, will also lead to a more peaceful world in a way, because if you are too interdependent and energy is weaponized or technology is weaponized, can be weaponized to a great extent, then there's a temptation for some to use it, like Russia used it against us in Europe. So being more, in Europe we call it strategic autonomy, we're being more strategic atomic, I think will be something where we can actually make a difference and hopefully thereby create the foundations for global actions. In my opinion, we need a much stronger Europe. And I think Europe changed last year. So all of these issues on whether we should enlarge European Union with what countries, I think, you know, for all of us, it's not a matter on whether we should, it's how we do it and how fast we can do it. And then we will bear the economic cost, but we'll also have to reform the system, the common agriculture system, for example, before we do it. But we need to do it now because of geopolitical imperative, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. Well, to whoever would like to give a quick answer. Yes, please.
Yeah, topics are similar. Right, we often hear this notion of European strategic autonomy, but in practice, or at least before the war, it was more about EU's strategic autonomy, particularly because the Western Balkans and the Eastern Partnership at that time were not as integrated within their plans. That is, the decisions were already made, and we were expected to simply follow and align the foreign policies. For me, European strategic autonomy would mean a common response of the current member states and future member states in discussions on all matters of mutual importance. And that's why, building upon what I previously said with the staged accession model, which my organization, European Policy Center, has proposed together with a partner organization from Brussels, it will actually require a pledge on the EU to increase the financial support for the future member states, to fight against the increasing socioeconomic gap between candidates and the conventional member states, and secondly, to start involving them in the work of the European Parliament, European Council, Council of the EU, European Commission, agencies and programs, and so on and so forth, so to have them as part of the solution as early as possible, while incentivizing them and giving the credibility to the EU membership perspective. Why I'm saying this? Well, I was in Berlin recently, and there was Minister Kuleba of Ukraine Foreign Affairs, and he's even said that one should, for example, not take for granted the EU optimism of Ukrainians. What if they start losing on the battlefield? What if the economy falls hard, even worse than it is currently? What if they can't simply implement the reforms as fast as one would hope? What if their process becomes as long as Western Balkans for 20 years? Of course, therefore, that this would be a geopolitical catastrophe for the entire continent. Therefore, my advice is to work on European strategic autonomy rather than just EU strategic autonomy, and to use this window of opportunity. We talk increasingly about the necessity to both deepen and widen the EU. While we do so, we also suggest that when candidates fulfill all the reforms, when they become members, that they should be required to temporarily renounce some voting rights in some areas where unanimity is required, as to allow the EU conventional member states to continue with their internal reforms while having the new countries from inside, from within. And therefore, this is, I believe, the best way to go towards a union, which could become more efficient in its own decision-making process, while also making them more geostrategically competent to, therefore, act on a global stage and as a union that has solved all the pertinent issues in the courtyard. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yes, please. And then we have Mr. Thompson. Yes, and Jenner.
Yeah, if I might come back to your question about the perspectives and hope, well, I think that, a certain hope exists because, we see when it's very human, when we are pushed to the edge, we are able to mobilize ourselves. And we have few examples of that. Ukraine, it was mentioned, and it mobilized Europe and even broader countries. But when it comes to climate change, I think even 2 years ago, perception was different among different actors in the world. Now we have different approaches and much more positive approaches. We just a day or 2 days ago read about or learned about the meeting between two leaders. Let's hope that cooperation will continue. There are some positive messages that when we are very much on the edge, we are able to proceed.
Yes, Mr. Thompson, and yes, so very quickly then we can ask some questions from the audience.
Yeah, just a couple of very quick points. First of all, I agree entirely with that, the expansion of the EU, and frankly, the sooner the UK re-enters, the better. That would be a nice, easy win. But I would slightly just caveat the idea of expansion, that we have to remember that EU expansion, or the prospect of EU expansion, was weaponised during the Brexit campaign. Posters of lots of immigrants, potential economic immigrants, etc., from Turkey was one of the posters that was put up that turned, partly turned the tide against membership and caused the Brexit vote. So there's a bit of element in that. But I think, look, frankly, just if you want to improve multilateralism, just do the exact opposite of what the UK does at the moment. I think is probably a very good point. So look, don't leave blocks like the EU. Don't lessen your commitment to climate change. You are just moving away from any form of leadership. And I think most importantly, and this is one that I particularly worry about in terms of our own democracy for the UK as well, is the constant threat of breaking international law. The UK government said it would break international laws in relation to Northern Ireland and the UK post-Brexit. The former Home Secretary on the Rwanda system that they're trying to put in place has said, and has put in newspaper articles, we should simply pass a law in the UK Parliament to disapply international laws. Why would any other country look to Britain, look to the UK as any form of example if that's how we're going to treat our international obligations? So do the direct opposite of the UK and frankly you can't go wrong.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Oui, nous sommes un panel européen et donc on montre beaucoup le modèle européen. Donc faisons attention de ne pas être trop arrogant vis-à-vis des autres. Je voudrais juste défendre d'un cran et revenir à ce qui a été dit à propos de la citoyenneté. et de la façon dont on doit renforcer les choses. En citant un de nos grands ancêtres européens, Thucydide, qui disait « il faut choisir, se reposer ou être libre ». Et je pense que la jeune génération européenne doit revenir à cette réflexion que la liberté, ça se défend, la démocratie, ça se défend, et ça se défend d'abord en la construisant. Et ensuite, puisqu'on parle en fait du multilatéralisme global, je pense que des organismes comme l'Europe doivent se renforcer, bien sûr, mais il y en a d'autres. L'Union africaine, nous sommes en Afrique, et l'Union africaine doit aussi se renforcer. Et quand ces blocs, avec leurs valeurs particulières, parce qu'elles ne sont pas forcément exactement les mêmes, vont pouvoir se réunir, à ce moment-là, trouver un terrain d'entente commun pour qu'on puisse effectivement construire le monde dans lequel nos enfants ou petits-enfants vivront. Voilà.
Mr. Zole?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say something in line with my general realism or pessimism, whichever way you want to call it. I wouldn't talk about hope and opportunities, because that has led us down a path of progress illusion, where we think we are making progress in a certain direction, and then we were disappointed when it didn't realize. I would talk about a normative imperative. We have to do these things. What has to be done even when it's going to hurt. And when it comes to that, I'm afraid to say, and I don't think the European Union is alone in that, but we can see it in all the current debates, including enlargement, including a number of other issues, that within the European Union, every country is struggling to overcome its own taboos. Every country is struggling with, apologies for this, with the British disease of saying, yes, we know what needs to be done, but we can't sell it in our domestic politics, so we don't even talk about it. And I think we have to actually have more leadership, more honesty, which shows that, yes, these things are very, very hard, and they are going to hurt, and they're going to hurt very many people, but they have to be done.
Thank you very much indeed to all of you. I would suggest that we gather a couple of questions from the audience. The first to break the ice. No, because I was convinced that I saw first hands. Yes, please.
Which one?
Yes. If you can introduce yourself and the institute that you're representing. Thank you.
Demande les personnes comme pour je parle en arabe, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, of course. If there is a translation, I suppose. Okay.
الآن سأبدأ. أود أولاً أن أشكر الحضور الساسة الأوروبيين، وسؤالي كالآتي: ما موقفكم الآن من الصراع الإسرائيلي الفلسطيني والقضية الفلسطينية؟ أنا جد سعيد يعني أرى آراءكم كلكم، أرى موقفكم من القضية الفلسطينية. ربما هذا السؤال كان بعيداً على موضوع الذي ناقشته، ولكن أريد آراءكم إذا أردتم.
Yes, please.
I want your opinion for the war in between Israel and Palestine.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Is there any one of you who? Yes, please. Would like to answer.
Vous comprenez le français ou pas?
Le français.
Je pense qu'il peut y avoir autant de réponses que de personnes sur le panel. Je vais vous donner mon impression, moi qui interviens très souvent sur les réseaux sociaux et sur et sur les télévisions.
D'accord.
Je pense qu'il faut d'abord, dans un premier temps, bien séparer la juste cause palestinienne du problème du Hamas. Le Hamas est un groupe terroriste qui a fait quelque chose d'absolument inqualifiable le 7 octobre, et il faut bien séparer ça. Deuxième point, les Européens, et là je peux peut-être parler pour un peu tout le panel, depuis longtemps disent qu'il faut deux États, un État palestinien, un État israélien, et que c'est cela qui donnera la sécurité aussi bien à Israël qu'à la Palestine. Maintenant, quand j'ai dit ça, il faut remonter 30 ans d'histoire aux accords d'Oslo. Et aujourd'hui, Israël, comme l'a dit le président Biden, ne vous laissez pas aveugler comme les États-Unis ont été aveuglés après le 11 septembre. Et donc, on est dans cette posture aujourd'hui. Et donc, c'est très, très difficile aujourd'hui. Si vous voulez, j'interviens sur les télévisions arabes aussi beaucoup. Sur les télévisions arabes, quand j'interviens, à côté de moi, il n'y a que des ambulances avec des enfants. Lorsque j'intervenais sur les télévisions occidentales, on montrait ce qui s'était passé le 7 octobre. Et j'ai eu l'occasion de voir les films de ce qui s'est passé le 7 octobre. Donc il faut absolument dépasser ça. Comment? Je ne peux pas vous donner la réponse aujourd'hui, mais il faut que la haine, pardonnez-moi, je termine, il faut que la haine, d'un côté comme de l'autre, revienne à quelle est la solution pour que dans le futur, ces peuples puissent vivre, je ne dis pas ensemble, au moins côte à côte. Voilà.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Well, I think it's, of course, a question we cannot avoid in this situation where we are in now. And serving as foreign minister until the end of last year, we did discuss often in the EU the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine. But I think I absolutely agree. We have to separate Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization, and what they did October 7th was the worst attack since Holocaust on civilian, innocent Israeli people. And this is something we should unite to condemn in the hardest possible terms, in my opinion. Then both the Palestinians and the Israelis, they have a just cause. Israel wants to live within international recognized and secure borders. Palestinians, they want to live in their own state. And they should both have that, both of them. And therefore, in my opinion, it's always been like that. I've been to the area many, many times. I've been to Gaza also several times. It's about a two-state solution, and we need to, in a way, to take out the power from the separatist and radicalist forces and try to see if we can find people who are genuinely interested in a two-state peaceful solution. When I'm saying that, I'm always accused that, well, that idea died when Rabin was killed because he tried to create peace. Maybe, but I don't think we should give up. I think it's an issue which is hard to solve, but we need to show also new generations that we can overcome what was mistakes in the past and find a way forward. I know it's very emotional now, and I hate to see what's happening in Gaza at the moment with innocent kids, people being killed, and how Hamas also has taken people as hostage in this. It's terrible. So the honest answer is there's no short-term solution, unfortunately. We have to manage the crisis. The longer term still is a two-state solution, in my opinion.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, please. If there is an additional response, yes. If you want to replicate, or yes, please. I see a hand. If you can give the microphone to the lady in the back.
Bonjour tout le monde. Je préfère m'exprimer en français. C'est beaucoup plus à l'aise pour moi. Donc, je suis consultante, c'est Mouna Nabil, je suis consultante en investissement et aussi je fais des recherches pour un master en droit international. Donc, je vais juste donner une brève image et puis après poser la question. Donc, il y a une vidéo de Madame Clinton dans lequel elle déclare, je ne sais pas si c'est crédible ou pas, j'ai beau chercher, j'ai pas trouvé, qui déclare que les terroristes, Hamas et le reste, ils ont été financés par eux, par leur gouvernement, d'une part. D'autre part, si on revient au mois de mars dernier, j'étais en France, et le roi Charles, qui était le roi Charles, devait rendre visite au président de la République française au mois de mars, mais pour raison de la polémique des retraites, de la grève des ébénistes et tout ça, il ne s'est pas rendu. Donc pour sa sécurité, la France elle a reporté cette visite, et on voit que l'attaque qu'on appelle attaque terroriste du Hamas le 8 octobre, et le président américain qui se déplace en Israël le 18 octobre, puis le président français qui se déplace en Israël le 24 octobre. Donc, ils sont sûrs qu'ils sont partis sur un terrain très, très clair, très sûr, très sécure. Qu'est-ce que vous pouvez dire de ça? Donc, qui est contre qui? Merci.
Very interesting question. Is there any volunteer to answer the question?
Juste un point, pardonnez-moi, j'ai pas compris exactement où venait la question et quelle était l'implication au départ, mais je voudrais rappeler que quand vous parlez des voyages du président Biden comme du président Macron, ça n'était pas qu'en Israël. Le président Macron est allé à Amman, il est allé au Caire, et le président Biden devait faire ce voyage-là, qui a été interrompu parce que vous vous souvenez qu'il y a eu à l'époque une critique sur un hôpital qui aurait été bombardé, avant qu'on se rende compte que c'était une roquette qui était tombée sur le parking à côté, et non pas l'hôpital qui a été bombardé. En plus, c'était une roquette d'un mouvement djihadiste. Donc voilà, si vous voulez, il ne faut pas voir les choses d'un seul angle. Je pense que le président Biden, comme le président Macron, comme probablement ceux qui interviennent, essayent de renouer les fils au Moyen-Orient. Et lorsqu'ils vont systématiquement au Caire, en Cisjordanie et à Amman en même temps qu'en Israël, c'est un signe. C'est-à-dire qu'on veut renouer les fils et non qu'on n'est pas uniquement dans une position unilatérale.
Thank you very much. It is indeed very interesting to see the symbolic part of all the official visits. And yes, thank you very much for bringing this up, since there are many angles to see such visits. And it is a panel which just opens the floor to many further thoughts and discussions. And I would thank you very much to all the distinguished panelists here who brought us their insights. And thank you very much to all of you. And I wish you a very good afternoon. Thank you.